And if you remember the figures from the Anthem of the Seas, 1,139 feet long, 162 feet at the beam. If you put these two end to end, if you put all three of them end to end, you're only going to have an overhang, what is that, 169? You're only going to have an overhang of 2.5 feet on either side. That's how small these things were. And they load up these two ships with the 153 from the Sea Ventures and with as much food as they can carry. They've salted pork and they've salted fish and they've gathered what plants produce edible food. In the few months that they've been there, they get a couple of things growing in the garden and they load them up to go to Jamestown, which was their initial destination. Miranda in the Tempest says, "Oh, brave new world." Indeed, it has been so far and will be again. They get from Bermuda to Jamestown on May the 10th, 1610. They landed there in July. It's been almost a year, 10 months. And they make the crossing. It takes them several weeks. When they get across to where Jamestown is, that's Bermuda. I showed you that already. When they get across to Jamestown, this entry into Jamestown is a tidal area. And the tide is on its way out. They have to wait for the tide to reverse so they can get in. There's a fort out here on the side, and they're not expecting visitors. And so they stop the ship. They quiz them. They inspect them. It's going to take a day or two before this gets all worked out. Then they sail on up to Jamestown, where Governor George Percy, I'm pretty well sure, was relieved to see new faces and, more importantly, new food, because Jamestown, according to Strachey's report, was 4 days away from starvation. The survivors from the original 100, the first 2 supplies, the people that had come on the other ships that were tossed about in the hurricane, 4 days. They bring an enormous quantity of food on these 2 vessels that will keep the colony alive, that will literally save Jamestown. It's a dying colony. And the new folks coming in who have done so much over there to survive and build 2 ships and cure the meat and save the meat and the food and all that to get over to them, they say the reason they're struggling is they're lazy. I doubt that was the true case, but that's one of the things they accuse them of. One real problem they had was the Virginia Company, when they sent them out, didn't send them well supplied. And the first supply and the second supply aren't well supplied. So they didn't give them all they needed to survive. But the big reason, Jamestown was founded in 1607. 1607, the year that they arrived, began the 7 driest years in a span of almost 800 years. Now, what's going on in Virginia? You have the local folks. You have the people who were there first. And you've got these invaders coming in. And you have 2 totally different cultures. And these colonists don't have a clue how to survive in this place. And so they have to get some help. There's tension back and forth. There are skirmishes. There are fights. There are deaths. It's the wrong time to be trying to found a colony in Virginia. But it was the time that they hit. And that, more than anything else, was the problem with Jamestown. The combat of the 2 different cultures, also the fact it's tough to grow food in a drought. This is what saves Jamestown. Nicotiana tabacum. Virginia tobacco. It came from one of the Caribbean islands, and It was brought by John Smith, who starts farming tobacco, and John Rolfe. 1612, he begins growing tobacco to save the colony. Here's what tobacco does for the colony. One man could work 4 acres and harvest 1,500 to 2,000 pounds, which then could be sold for a 21st century income of between $68,000 and $90,000. One man. In England at the time, a farmer could make between 3,000 and 6,000. So you see the disparity, you see the difference. It is tobacco that actually saves Jamestown. If the Sea Venture does not get there with the food, Jamestown is lost anyway. But Jamestown will be saved when they introduce tobacco and begin to do tobacco. Now, George Somers decides that he is going to go back to Bermuda and harvest more food for them. He promises, I'll go back, we'll prepare, we'll come back with more food. And a group of people go back with him to Bermuda. They will land in what is today Sandus Parish. If you've sailed into King's Wharf, and this is where your cruise ship would dock. They sail in here, and he'll explore the island. They'll do the harvesting. But the people who have come with Somers back to Bermuda have seen how life is in Jamestown, how hard it is. And they don't want to go back. And they take a vote, and they say, we don't want to go back. And Somers said, well, I promised them that I'd bring them back food. We'll honor the promise. Somers dies. He has probably a heart attack, dies. This is Somers' garden in Bermuda, up in St. George's. And this is a view of the garden. Here's the gates into it. If you walk through the gates, turn to the left, there's this big sarcophagus where they say is the heart of Admiral Sir George Somers. He didn't leave his heart in San Francisco. He left his heart in Bermuda. And the body was put in some kind of preservative and sent back to England to bury. Matthew Somers, who is his nephew, says, I'm not going back. And the rest of the folks say, good plan. We're not going back. They leave 3 men on the island to claim the island. They're going to go back. They're going to get a royal charter. They're going to get financing and come back and start the Bermuda colony. While they are gone, the 3 men discover an 80-pound piece of ambergris. Now, we're really not sure in the 21st century exactly what ambergris is. Excuse me, it's either whale snot or whale poop. Probably whale snot, but not real sure. They find an 80-pound piece of it. It was sold for 9,000 pounds sterling, when an average English worker would make 10 to 20 pounds a year. In 21st century, that's $2.5 million. The Bermuda colony is instantly financially successful and secure because of that lucky discovery. It's instantly profitable. They come back with colonists, they come back with ships and sailors and supplies, and the Bermuda colony is built from a hurricane and a shipwreck. Jamestown is saved because of a hurricane and a shipwreck. And there's one more part of the story as I wrap it up. William Strachey has not given up hope of being a writer. He's kept the record of the 10 months over in Bermuda. Here is the actual journal that he kept. And he sends it on a ship back to England before they come back over to make the rescue and decide we're not going back ever again. He has a woman back there that he hopes will be his sponsor. He's talked to her before about sponsoring his writing. He sends the journal to her to show her what he can do. This would make a fantastic book if it's published. It's going to sell well. He pitches the project, sends it back to her. One day, once he gets back to England, he stumbles into Blackfriars Theatre, where there's a play being put on. Little-known playwright. You may never have heard of him, William Shakespeare. And he's putting on a play called The Tempest. And as Strachey is sitting there listening and watching the play, the actors on stage are saying some of the same things that he said in his journal. William Shakespeare was a literary pickpocket. Now, that's not to say he was bad. It was the custom of the day that you would quote liberally from another author to honor them and their work. It wasn't considered plagiarism, it was considered honoring it. So he's in effect honoring Strachey, but Strachey doesn't make a nickel off of it. But The Tempest may be the last play that William Shakespeare wrote. And the hurricane and the shipwreck that founds a colony and saves a colony ends up producing one of the greatest pieces of literature in the English catalog. Things like the sprite up in dancing. They had St. Elmo's fire. You know, that static electricity that would produce fire on board a sailing ship. And other things that take place in the play had already taken place on Bermuda, as Shakespeare works it into The Tempest. And as Prospero said, our revels are now ended. Folks, that's Tempest in the Atlantic. Thank you for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you. I'm going to wander down. Paul cut my microphone off. And if you have, thank you. I do appreciate that so much. Come up and ask questions, comments, and let's hang out for a few minutes as you can. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, we'll do it all over with a new topic. See if I can get it right this time. Thanks again.